You still can't call Mamdani a commie, but you can call Trump a fascist, apparently. It's the Newsbusters podcast. I'm Tim Graham, executive editor, here today with managing editor Curtis Houck.
Hello.
And our nightly news analyst, Jorge Bonilla.
Hello.
We wanted to start today with this whole notion of Kristen Welker had Mamdani on yesterday. And it's like, well, is she going to ask him any tough questions? And the answer was basically no. There was one about anti-Semitism. That was probably the closest. But, she has to ask him, so, you called Trump a fascist. Can you call him Trump a fascist again? I was like, what is the purpose of this? Why would you feel the need to do that? Now, obviously, Our point is, yes, Trump called Mamdani a communist, which there's quotes you can use, and they all go nuts and say that's a lie, but you can call Trump a fascist all day long.
Well, this is where you get into the performative that, you need to be able to say that on our air. We want the clip of you calling Trump a fascist with our background there. But yes, you're right. As a general principle, it is pathetic and it is stupid to kind of continually engage in this kind of exercise. And I think this also stems, Tim and Jorge, from the fact that the meeting did not go the way that the press hoped it would. That Trump was able to charm his way through. He probably heard all the coverage that this meeting's going to be a disaster. And he thought, I'm going to show these people.
Yeah, he does like surprising, but I think the consistency here in the way that he defended the Saudi prince and the way he defended Mamdani, it's the same thing, which is like, he's my guest. I've got to show hospitality like he's running a hotel.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Right. Well, the thing is that, as Curtis alluded to, Trump and Mamdani being cordial and being almost, Mamdani, there's a whole optical thing to that meeting, right? They didn't sit next to each other in the Oval, but you had Trump seated and you had Mamdani standing. That was an optical thing that I noticed nobody talked about. Trump was still showing that he was fully in charge, but with them being cordial and them deflecting away from any attacks, and especially when Mamdani was asked the fascist thing, and Trump just totally absolves him and says, don't worry, just say yes. It'll be fine. It'll be easier than explaining. Just say yes. At that point, it became necessary for Mamdani to do the thing and have to come on and have to reaffirm and have to do the chant and wear the flag pin and say, Trump's a fascist. And that's what that was about. Because again, the elitist media were kind of upset about this. They were upset about this not being a big blow up. That's why you had Susan Glasser on ABC's this week decrying this being, a yuck kind of meeting, and Mamdani and Trump just laughing it up. Everybody was upset about this, so that's why it became necessary.
The only thing
to have Mamdani on and chant the thing.
The only thing I was just going to add, Jorge, is that reminds me so much of this idea that back in the day, this would be the kind of segment that O'Reilly would have a body language expert on to talk about the way that
so then it would be like, but you'd be like, okay, Trump is sitting, Mamdani is standing with his hands folded. Does it look like Trump's going to ask him to get him a Diet Coke?
Yeah.
But I just thought it was fascinating that not only did Kristen Welker say, please call him a fascist again, he felt the need to be like, well, I said it to his face.
Okay. I did say yes.
Yeah, it's like you have to say, no, I smeared him there. I'm not just smearing him here. I'm going to smear him there. And that's where it just bothers me, because I remember a few years ago with Chris Matthews, he said he would never use left. He wouldn't use the term liberal or left because it made Democrats sound like Marxists or something. I mean, he was so exquisitely sensitive to how you couldn't use labels for Democrats. Well, fascism doesn't just imply dictatorship. Fascism implies the Holocaust. Hitler implies the Holocaust. So when
Right.
you're using those words, they're incredibly loaded words.
We talked about that with Bill the last time I was here on the show about how fascism has become a catch-all term from the left, especially to talk about anyone that they don't like. Instead of use bigger words to describe them, you just simply go with fascist and call it a day.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think
when you use the term fascist, that makes it easier to disqualify the person, to disqualify their points of view, and eventually censor them. There was an instance the other day where somebody went on Spain's state-funded TV and said, "We believe in free speech for everyone except fascists who deserve no free speech." So once you throw that label, it's very easy, and again, to disqualify, to exclude from the public square, and it justifies the incitation of violence against them.
Well,
so that's why fascism is so dangerous.
yeah, I was going to say, I think we would also have to note that this is the way that Marxists like to define their opposition. So,
Yes.
I mean,
Literally.
So, but also the irony of all of this, which is like, okay, which people on the political scene like Hitler the most? That would be the Hamas types.
Right.
I mean, so isn't Mamdani closer to Hitler than Trump?
They're the side that disputes how many people were actually killed in the Holocaust or whether the Holocaust even actually happened.
Yeah, so it is funny to me that, yes, that Susan Glasser would complain that that Trump somehow won that exchange, and because it's not really an exchange to be won. It's just, I guess what they were trying to tell us was, yes, Trump isn't sending the National Guard. Trump isn't cutting off federal funds for New York. You know,
Right.
and maybe Trump's enough of a New Yorker that he's not really interested in doing that. But I don't think the occasion itself is a grand stage for assessing everybody's body language.
Well, I would just say that Brent Scher, the editor-in-chief at the Daily Wire, tweeted after the meeting that, as you know, he himself is a guy from New York. People ask me, how am I still able to get along with all these lefties that I knew in New York? And now I can say, go look at Trump and Mamdani.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're two New York people, and that they found a way to at least pretend to get along for now in their first meeting. And, you know, I mean, I think it's just a New York thing. Who knows? Again, this could very easily go away very quickly the moment Mamdani actually is inaugurated and starts presenting policy points, or maybe even next year at the United Nations General Assembly, if Netanyahu tries to come and speak, and we end up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could guess that it's probably more likely that the hard left is going to be upset with Mamdani. You know,
Yeah.
the Linda Sarsours are like, we're going to be monitoring him like a hawk, and he better do everything the pro-Hamasniks want.
Right.
Is probably going to be, there's going to be room there for the far left to be upset that Mamdani's too squishy.
Right.
Let's shift into one of the other big things on the Sunday shows yesterday, and that is just the whole fascinating phenomenon of Alyssa Slotkin and company make a video. And I decided, nobody's touching this. So let's do a blog saying nobody's touching this. And because that's the way it started. And then Trump, of course, goes on Truth Social and says, you know, execute anybody who's seditious. And then suddenly everybody's covering the story. But of course, this is where we give you the honor, Mr. Jorge, for coining, or did you coin, Trump washing?
I don't. You know what? Sometimes great minds think alike. So I don't know for sure if I'm the first guy that came up with that. I know that I hadn't read it anywhere else, so I'll take it. But yeah, that's exactly what happened here. Like so many other stories, the elitist media don't cover something, and they hold their fire, they hold their breath until Trump says something, and then when they do go around to covering the story, they will cover whatever Trump's statement was as a scandal greater than the scandal that he's reacting to, which is the actual scandal. And that's what a Trump wash story is. And certainly this video made by these 5 or 6 Democrat members of Congress, it certainly qualifies as a Trump wash story.
Well, and I think that the way that the media covered this They didn't cover it, then suddenly they did. Does make you go, was this the intention of making the video, was to make Trump overreact?
Well, this is also, I mean, Jorge, I mean, if you can think of other examples, but I know the ones that come to mind for me is whenever we're talking about angel moms, we're talking about illegal immigrant crime, the president will come out and say something on social media, and then that in and of itself will be the bigger story than what they actually did. You know, when it comes to Father of the Year, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, it is more about what the president is saying about him versus the actual charges that were leveled against him, specifically human trafficking or just simply being in the country illegally or the mentions of abuse.
I think what's interesting here, and this was the other thing that struck me, Jorge, in looking back at your last blog on Kristen Welker interviewing Trump, and that is, of course, they didn't interview and they didn't air the entire interview on Meet the Press. And then there's this section of the interview where Trump starts talking about Kilmar Abrego Garcia being a wife beater, and NBC leaves that on the cutting room floor. So the lesson for NBC is we want to underline the idea that Trump is a fascist, and we are going to edit out Kilmar Abrego Garcia. That's the truth. The truth is the wife put on a restraining order on him. It's not the truth Trump's a fascist. So truth is not the main thing.
Truth to the media is whatever makes Trump look bad.
Right.
Or whatever will further in casting him as either deranged, as an authoritarian, as a fascist. So that's where you get this. And just taking a quick look back, there's been a bunch of, the BBC story was one that was recently Trump washed. That whole BBC fake news scandal where they selectively edited things. That didn't get reported until Trump reacted to it. Going back to the campaign, Springfield, Ohio, that didn't get covered until Trump went on that debate and said famously, they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. That became the scandal, and not unchecked illegal immigration in Springfield, Ohio. So there's a long history of these stories that get deliberately held back in the hopes that maybe Trump says something that could be cast as outrageous, and that'll be the scandal, and that'll be the lead, and that'll be what the media go with.
So on several of the Sunday shows, the stars of this video, you don't have to disobey illegal orders, or you don't have to obey illegal orders, came on. And I guess we would say there was a faint attempt at fact-checking where they're like, which illegal orders are you referring to? And they didn't really have one, but that was like the one half tough question. It's not really a tough.
Jorge, definitely go into explain what happened with Martha Raddatz and Alyssa Slotkin, because that one in particular was my favorite.
Well, it was pro forma, and here's Slotkin, I guess, showcasing her CIA skills. She went on, and when she was asked by Martha Raddatz, she went into this whole thing about, well, we got these young Southcom officers telling us that this is happening, and National Guardsmen, and she just never gave an illegal reason or an actual example of an illegal order until Raddatz questioned her, and then she sort of backtracked. She wanted to cite the whole thing about Trump allegedly telling soldiers to shoot people in the legs in 2020. And then when Raddatz said, oh, no, he didn't ever said that. Oh, well, thank God, because that's where he walked out of the Oval Office if he could give an order. It was ridiculous. And Raddatz never really checked Alyssa Slotkin on that, not as aggressively as, for example, she did J.D. Vance when he was talking about Tren de Aragua crime. So it was very selective. It was very weak in how Martha Raddatz tried to fact check Alyssa Slotkin. It was more of a pro forma thing, really. And we saw the same thing with Margaret Brennan. She had on both Jason Crow and Mark Kelly. And in both cases, well, with Jason Crow, she did a weak fact check. With Kelly, she didn't even bother. He gave some outrageous statement, and she flicked right over to Ukraine. So there was really no interest in pushing them to say what is an illegal order. In both of these cases, it was, oh, well, Trump said this and Trump said that. Nothing that amounted to an illegal order, which, again, that allowed them to focus back on the, well, Trump said hanging and Trump said sedition, and focus on the Trump washing it side of it all.
Right. Well, and this again goes, Jorge, to the reality of how it's all about no evidence. There's no sort of attempt. It's all vague generalities. It's kind of a wink and a nudge from these folks. And then on the part of the journalist, it's the Jake Tapper approach, which is maybe ask a tough question, but if they give some spineless answer, there's no attempt at a follow-up because they know, these Democrats know, that if they can just make it through the first round of a semi-difficult question, they will very quickly then move on. And that's where it gets particularly dangerous. And Ben Ferguson on CNN Thunderdome was called out for the fact that he pointed out that they were, one of them was doing a fundraising email about this.
Sure. Oh, yeah. And probably several of them.
Neera Tanden and Abby Phillips said, oh, there's no evidence to any of this. They weren't really doing that. And like Ben literally read the text. And
Here it is.
And they just, again, they're like, they're not doing that. We don't listen to what you just heard.
No, I get an unseemly amount of Democrat fundraising emails in my email. I don't even know how that happened. It started with Adam Schiff. And then I get Nancy Pelosi, and now I'm getting more. But that I should go dig up mine because I know that they raised money off of it. So, I mean, that again goes back to the notion of they did this for a reason. And it's interesting you mentioned this Mark Esper story. Now, notice when people tell wild tales that they don't really have evidence for, except Trump told me. Do you have it on tape? No. You know, generally you don't go around taping the president when he talks to you, but it's like they believe that like it's gospel. You don't have to prove anything. And we all know this, that if you said Biden said to me, you know, something stupid, they would go, you don't have any proof of that. You didn't record it. You know, they would dismiss it.
Mary Bruce would say there's no proof of that. And Jorge, this also gets to the point about what's going on, and you've known this as well. This is moving to the point of sanitizing, defending, apologizing, covering for the regime in Venezuela. That's what a lot of this is actually about. And I think more people need to be covering this. If you can go into this, I'll just say that Mary Bruce has been doing this on ABC as well, basically saying there's no evidence. The administration hasn't provided any evidence to any of these things that they've been doing with the drug boats. But I think, Corey, you're absolutely right. And you can explain this to folks about how that ties into the video.
Well, it totally ties in. You know, there's tons of evidence that the cartel of the Suns is a real thing and that they've been running things in Venezuela for as long as anybody can imagine. We have the former head of the Directorate of Military Intelligence, Hugo Carvajal, who's in South Florida in a prison, singing like a bird in order to avoid a life sentence. And he's giving up the farm, giving up everything. And that's where we have these factual bases to run on. There's evidence, if you want to find it, the price of street cocaine in Puerto Rico has gone up $5,500 a kilo as a result of the attacks on these drug boats. So I don't know what more direct evidence to offer than that. But there is direct evidence as to the existence of the cartel of the Suns, things that don't get reported on, for example, like that, like what the cartel of the Suns means, like the long time association between the military and narcotics organizations and these different regimes, not just Venezuela, but now you look at Colombia, the activities that they fund. You had Hugo Chavez with the FARC rebels in Colombia, the laptop that was uncovered in Ecuador over a decade and a half ago, talking about $300 million in assistance. This has been going on for decades. So the idea that this is a without evidence assertion is ridiculous. And it is an absolute gaslight. The cartel of the Suns has been running Venezuela for decades now. They are responsible for transnational crime. They are responsible for the Tren de Aragua. They are responsible in large part for this migrant crisis that facilitated tens of millions of people coming over the border and into our own homeland. So yes, I think it does merit asking, why does Alyssa Slotkin and all these other Democrats, why do they want to protect that? Why do they not want us to engage that and interdict that? And I would just point out one more thing that hasn't been reported on or hasn't been discussed, even though it's out there, is that by definition, these videos might not be seditious, but they do fall under 18 U.S. Code 2387. They certainly fit the elements of activities affecting armed forces generally. And if I may quote, whosoever with intent to interfere with, impair, or influence the loyalty, morale, or discipline or military of the military and naval force of the United States, or advises, counsels, urges, or in any manner causes or attempts to cause insubordination, disloyalty, mutiny, or refusal of duty by any member of the military or naval forces of the United States. It goes on to say, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 10 years or both. I mean, there is something there.
Well, look, this is why they chose the people they chose for this, that
Correct.
They chose Democrats who had a military or intelligence background. And to me, it illustrates, again, what's been happening to Trump since he was first elected in 2016. And that is, you have like this army. This is the deep state. In this case, the Pentagon CIA version of the deep state is that they're basically encouraging more of the same. PBS had a segment on this on the NewsHour where it was like, they found this group called the Orders Project, and they're basically like, you know, how many reports or questions are you getting from soldiers in the field who hate Trump, encouraging more of that, hoping to get more of that, and that's the problem. So here we have PBS Washington Week with The Atlantic, with Jeffrey Goldberg coming on and making snarky comments, and he actually tried to claim that the video that Slotkin and the others made was eminently ignorable, and it's like, how is that? Why would you make a video that you don't expect Trump to react to?
You don't pay attention. Don't make this video. Let's go through this work and then say, no. Let's not pay attention to that.
I mean, she wants to run for president.
It was made to trigger a reaction. I'll you know what? This is just me on my own. I'd even say more. I would say that this was intended not just to inflame the armed forces, but to inflame the populace against President Trump. I will note that the ICE raids, I think, in blue cities were supposed to be the trigger for mass protests against the Trump administration. They were, you know, something similar to the summer of love in 2020. That's what we saw coming out of Los Angeles when those first raids hit in LA. And we saw that massive mobilization. You had people funded by nonprofit groups handing out gas masks and all these sort of things and all that chicanery. We knew that was supposed to be the trigger. ICE raids was supposed to be the trigger for massive protests in big cities. When that fizzled out, I think that Venezuela was the next thing that these people glommed down to in order to trigger another color revolution in the United States.
Right, because other than some bad polling, you haven't really seen like mass public protests at all specifically about the raids. I mean, yes, you had the No Kings silliness a few weekends ago, but in terms of the media have not been able to foment the same level of discord. And I think the other thing that's not mentioned, Jorge, is the reality that the deep state truly believes, and this is a way of thumbing their nose at a president with whom they disagree, that we will wait you out. We will be around longer than you. So you can try and do your little thing, but we're the real people that are in charge of these agencies.
Well, I mean, this is, again, I'm not always one of these people that's always seeing a deep state around every corner, but this is a really easily defined feature of the deep state, which is I'm waging war on Trump through anonymous sourcing. You know, you can't find out who I am. You know, I am hidden behind a wall of anonymity by newspapers and networks that want Trump gone. They're all working in league. And so, this video seems like an on-the-record piece of what they normally do off the record or on deep background. Speaking of ICE, there's just been so much relentless smearing of ICE, just like they smear Trump. ICE, they say, is Trump's Gestapo, which again implies a Holocaust. Like, we're not putting illegal immigrants in death camps. You know, they're not the Uyghurs in China. You know, this isn't the Soviet Union. But this is the imagery we get, is that ICE is tyranny. and that ICE is terrorist. That's sort of the implication. So on Friday nights, the 11th hour with Stephanie Rule, they brought on journalism professor Jason Johnson, a contributor to M. Snow, I guess whatever we want to call it now. And they were doing MVP of the week. Now, he starts by giving the MVP of the week to all the Charlotte leftist students who walked out of class to protest ICE. Or, as we know, some student protesters are like, hey, I want to go get a coffee and hang out and not go to school.
Or some leftist girl is going to this thing. I want to show that I care.
Yeah, I'm down with the struggle, hun. So then but then he goes on to start talking about, and they're slashing the tires of ICE agents, and the ICE is being chased out of buildings. Like, he's really, really happy at all the rioting, basically, all of these sort of insurrectionist activities, and that's the fascinating part. Is like, you guys don't get to lecture us about January 6th with this spirit of we're going to wreck things for ICE. And when they respond to people who are ramming their trucks, then they're the violent ones. They can't even acknowledge that the people the people on the other side engage in violent tactics.
Well, yeah, Jason Johnson has a long history of incendiary rhetoric. He's just said all kinds of things. Like, he said racism and crimes against migrant crime is a white people problem. He said it's a thing that white people deal with. And he said Trump attacks all black people who are not bojangling. He said all kinds of incendiary things about this. And he said kids in cages, the detention centers, is white nationalism in and of itself. So, this is a guy who says all kinds of things. And it's the fact that he's a journalism professor is a commentary on what the journalism schools in America are right now.
Yeah, it is a sad thing, is that especially the journalism schools that are churning out the people that are going into the pipeline, whether it's Columbia, whether it's Northwestern, a lot of the journalism schools, oh my gosh, out in California, if you're in LA in journalism school, even Syracuse. The new kids who are coming into these newspapers and media organizations are incredibly woke. They're the ones that, you can't publish an op-ed by Senator Cotton or you get fired. Right. It is certainly something to worry about. But it's just this whole notion we have that them trying to deport people is somehow a terrorist activity. It's mind-boggling. And let me say, it's very weird for Jason Johnson to say it's a white thing to care about migrant crime. We just had this story out of Maryland a few weeks ago. Black people die in migrant crime.
Yep. Prince George's County.
See, but when you live in the blizzard of M. Snow, nobody ever has a discouraging word. There's never anybody who brings another point of view.
Right. To say like, oh, yes, there's Molly Tibbetts, but I raise you this. Yeah. Or, yes, I see what happened in Harford County, Maryland.
Jameel Shaw, wasn't it? The quarterback in California?
Exactly.
What this ultimately does is is trying to create an incentive structure and a permission structure for people to engage in further violent actions against ICE. And what this rhetoric is going to do is ultimately get somebody shot. And I think that's the end goal of that rhetoric, to get somebody shot to where they have a casus belli to instigate widespread violence against ICE and get that color revolution that they want.
Well, and it takes us back to this whole notion of which side is ruder. So, when Trump has these Truth Social posts that say, sedition can get you executed, and then everybody reacts to that. But it's like, you're the ones that are constantly telling us that Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy. Now, how can you not hear what that says? It kind of encourages people to say, if he's an existential threat to the country, what do you think we should do about that?
We should do something about this, The only, it's not death by exile, it's just death.
They had a protest this weekend, some sort of impeachment rally on the hard left. You can see that by going to Grabian Video. I got to see if the networks, I haven't looked at this yet, whether the networks noticed it or not. Probably not.
No.
The news isn't as exciting on college football weekends.
No.
Or pro football weekends. So, but we're always looking at that. Even in Thanksgiving week, we're a little depopulated here. We're still going to be digging out the bias as we can find it, which is why you come to Newsbusters. Once, twice, 24 times a day. Thanks for listening and watching.